All right, welcome into another episode of the News4JAGs podcast. I'm Jamal St here alongside Justin Barney. We're back in our little podcast room here at Channel 4 after what was a busy week last week for us. We were over at TPC Sawgrass for the Players' Championship. It was fantastic over there. Weather was great, but it was a busy kind of week.
And every week we're out at the Players. It never fails. Free agency always happens when we're at the Players. So, again, I mentioned it last week. 2 years ago, we were out at the Players trying to decipher who these guys were coming over, the names, the pronunciations and stuff. Now they came fast and furious and had an idea who was heading to Jacksonville once 4 o'clock rolled around on Wednesday.
All right, so with free agency kind of behind us, Jaguars have a pretty big haul. I think we both are in agreement that we feel pretty good about where the Jaguars are at with the players that they've added. But there's still a few needs. Before we jump into kind of looking at just what those are, let's kind of go through them real quick. So I still think they have a need at wide receiver. I think everybody knows they have a need at corner. I think there is a little bit of a need maybe on that defensive line still. And maybe you could say there's a need on offensive line, but I think they're a little comfortable with some of the guys they got of kind of maintaining the status quo, right?
Yeah, and I think probably biggest needs to me are in very similar to yours. I mean, if if I'm ranking, I would say you probably need that number one corner, which you do not have. Darius Williams being gone, Ronald Darby in. I think you want to add in the draft at that position. And I think number two has got to be a bona fide, legit receiver, height guy who can develop into that alpha, that number one receiver. They've not had that in a while. Of course, they lost Calvin Ridley to the Titans in free agency. And then, of course, I'm with you, Jamal. I think you really need to concentrate more on that pass rush. So I would say corner would be one, receiver two, and then pass rush of some kind three, and then maybe if you're adding some offensive line depth would be by number four. But I think the top three needs are pretty much universal.
Sure. Look, I think everybody can agree that there are needs on this roster. The Jaguars have to get better at a few spots, but we feel pretty good about where they're at. I think they've addressed some of those needs in free agency enough to the point where you start to say, well, at 17, they're in a good spot to be able to take the best player available. And that's something that going into free agency, we didn't necessarily feel they'd be able to do, but after the ads that they've made across the free agent market, adding guys like Eric Armstead, Darnell Savage, they've addressed a lot of those needs, filled some holes on the roster, even upgraded a spot or two. And now at 17, it really feels like they're going to be able to get a really good player that falls to them. And at whatever position, it should add something to the roster. Now, the question becomes just what position they're going to be able to address. I know we've talked about they still kind of need a starter at corner. I mean, right now you feel like you got your two outside guys, but you still need a slot corner for sure. Nobody's going to complain if you go defensive line either, and I don't think anybody's going to throw a pity party if the Jaguars somehow got one of the top wide receivers, right?
No, absolutely, and I think you've got to address, and I think after free agency, after this week, sitting here right now, I think they got better in the offseason so far. At center, no doubt, Mitch Morse is a significant upgrade over Luke Fortner there. He's a veteran, Pro Bowler as recently as 2 years ago. I think they got better on the offensive line with the addition of Mitch Morse, and I think they got a heck of a lot better on the defensive line with Eric Armstead. So the other positions, Devin Duvernay over Jamal Agnew, maybe a little bit of wash there. I think Ronald Darby may be a tick below Darius Williams, especially with how Darius performed last year. In the secondary, I think that the Rayshon swap, Savage swap is maybe a little bit of a wash. I think Savage has more upside, and I think he's got a little bit more potential than Rayshon Jenkins. But again, Rayshon had a couple really good years in Jacksonville, especially that playoff season. His performances in the Cowboys game, he had some unbelievable times in Jacksonville, so sad to see him go. But I do think Jacksonville, so far in free agency, has gotten better at some serious positions of need. And you do have that flexibility in the draft now to maybe take that best player available with the moves you made in free agency.
All right, with that in mind, so this is the beginning where draft season really starts to heat up. Jaguars have the 17th pick. We'll dive farther into the draft for them later as we kind of go through draft season, but right now I think we want to start at the top down and let's start talking about 17. So part of that, everybody loves the mock draft simulators. I know I do. If I run a good one, I leave them posted up on my computer. I don't make too many public mock drafts until at least after free agency, just because that's when things start to settle down. So what we're going to do is, like I said, me and Justin have maybe some differing views on how these boards are going to shake out just a little bit. There might be a bet there. We'll talk about it here in a little bit when we look at the board. But we're going to run a couple of mock draft simulators live here, and we'll see how they shake out, who's sitting on the board, maybe have some discussions about need-based pick versus best player available, and see if maybe we can come to a consensus in the draft room on what the Jaguars will do, and maybe a couple of do this on a couple of different websites and see what we can come up with. So we'll start off with PFF.
Okay.
All right, so let's run it.
Just about to run it, and I'm going to try not to use other mock draft simulators where they ran picks before, and Caleb Williams was like the 10th pick in the draft. So
right.
We're going to steer towards more of the reputable ones. So, okay, we're sitting here pretty right now, starting the draft. Here we go. Bears on the clock. And
let's roll through it. Look, some of them are easy. And by the time you get to 17, there's a number of ways that those first 16 picks can go. I don't really like talking about some of the trade up, trade down scenarios, not in these simulators. I prefer to just stay there and kind of see how things shake out. So now you can kind of see the board there, Justin, of the players that are still on the board. They're on your screen at home if you're watching. But for the folks that are listening, can you go through some of the top players?
So we've got really no surprises in the first few picks. At number 1, Caleb Williams, who we saw and got a chance to talk to the players last week. He goes to the Bears. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion after the Bears dealt Justin Fields this past week. J.J. Daniels, LSU quarterback, Heisman winner, goes to the Commanders at 2. Drake May. Patriots start their quarterback clock over with Drake May, the North Carolina signal caller, at 3. Number 4, the Cardinals go offensive line. A little bit of a shift there. A lot of the mocks had Marvin Harrison Jr. Joe Alt, the big tackle from Notre Dame, he goes 4 to Cardinals.
Sure.
Number 5, we have a new toy for Jim Harbaugh out in Chargers country, Martin Harrison Jr. Malik Neighbors, the second best receiver in this class from LSU. He goes 6 to the Giants. 7, the Titans, again, Talise Fuaga going there. So we're going to hear the Titans quite a few times in this offseason after signing Calvin Ridley. Talise Fuaga there at Oregon State, big tackle. The Falcons at 8, Dallas Turner, edge rusher from Bama. 9, Roma Dunze from Washington, big receiver. 10, let's see, the tackle from Penn State, Ola
Fashanu? No, that's not Fashanu.
Oluwima Iwa Fashanu.
Yeah, that's Fashanu. Yeah, Fashanu. Okay. Sorry.
At number 10 to the Jets, and some significant offensive line help. The 11 to the Vikings, J.J. McCarthy. He replaces Kirk Cousins. 12, Jared Verse from Florida State going to the Broncos. Broncos in the midst of a complete rebuild. Brock Bowers, who I'd love to get in Jacksonville, he's going to the Raiders at 13, big tight end from Georgia. Saints, we're talking corners here right now. They go Terron Arnold from Bama at number 14. Byron Murphy, the lineman from Texas, defensive lineman from Texas, goes to the Colts. We'll be seeing him in the AFC South. At pick number 15, Quinion Mitchell, this is a guy who's been mocked to the Jags a ton. He goes a spot before the Jags pick to the Seahawks at number 16. So right now, Jamal, the Jags are on the clock.
On the clock.
We know all the needs that we've spoken about so far.
All right. Johnny Newton's one of the players that comes to mind that's still on the board. Who else you got?
We got Cooper.
Okay, Cooper DeJean, sorry.
Iowa corner/safety at the next level.
What else you got?
Jerzon Newton, the defensive interior lineman from Illinois.
What's the third name on that list, Justin?
Guy that Jamal likes here, Troy Fatanu from Washington, offensive lineman. We'll discuss that a little bit more. Nate Wiggins, corner from Clemson, also in the mix. Jackson Powers Johnson, he's been the trendy offseason guy in Jags fan base. The center from Oregon, don't think he goes there now with the moves they've made. Another guy that you like, Jamal, he medically retired a little bit. Latu.
Latu. Yes, sir.
He's in the mix.
He's nice.
J.C. Latham, tackle from Alabama.
Okay.
Amarius Mims, who my buddy of mine, Bill, thinks Jags are going to draft him at tackle at 17.
Look, Mims is a mountain of a man. So I think we can stop going down the list there, and let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing as far as this, at least this version has shaken out, right? So after kind of looking at it, where's your head at as you look at that board?
Oh, man. It's tough because I do think you addressed center right now. And I think, Cooper DeJean, Nate Wiggins kind of pick here. I think it, to me, had things fallen out according to other mock drafts. I think Quinion Mitchell would have been a great pick for Jacksonville. A corner, had a great senior bowl, but he's gone in this situation. So if I'm looking at this is how the draft broke down. I think you probably are, I mean, you do Brian Thomas. He's another guy who'd been mocked to Jacksonville.
Still on the board?
He's still on the board.
LSU's wide receiver? Look, he's size, speed, weight combination. I mean, a monster. I think he's going to be gone before the Jaguars are on the clock once April rolls around. That's just guys that are that big, run that fast, typically don't last very long in the draft. But in this version, I think maybe that is one that is worth at least an extended discussion. Look, wide receiver and adding depth at that wide receiver spot is never going to be bad for the Jaguars. 100%, at least in my view. I think, look, you lost Calvin Ridley. You feel good about where you're at.
Yep.
But if you added one more guy, you're going to feel better. But as Justin Barney knows, I am on the offensive line train for 17. I just think there's going to be a really good offensive lineman on the board at 17 for the Jaguars. And I've looked at it and I've given these guys that I'm looking for a name. I call it the F it crew. Just F it, run the pick in. Fashanu, Fuaga, Fatano. Something. One of them. One of those guys is going to be on the board. Fashanu, Fatanu, and Fuaga. Those are the three. I got it that time. Look, one of those guys is going to be there, and all three of them are really good offensive linemen. And now hear me out. I'm going to give you my pitch for this, Justin, see if I can swing you. So the reason we think corner is such a big deal, right? A, they need a nickel.
Yep.
Nickels aren't paid a lot in the NFL. Kenny Moore just got a deal that's a total of $30 million, making him the highest paid slot corner in the league. They can find a nickel. But we think it's a big deal because Darby's on a 2-year contract. Tyson Campbell's in the last year of his deal, right? So who is in the future your starting corner? Right? What about offensive tackle? Right now, as it stands, Cam Robinson's in the last year of his deal, which they could move on from, save a whole bunch of money, which would help you extend Trevor Lawrence, a guy some people like. And Walker Little's in the last year of his deal. So as it stands, next season rolls around, the only guy you know for sure is back on your team in Jacksonville, Anton Harrison. So why are we not looking at offensive tackle as much of a need position as we are corner? Because there are the same questions about the future of the position in Jacksonville for offensive tackle as there are for corner.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Oh, there you go.
It makes sense. But, and I will preface this with a but, because I do think you have to look forward to the future. But you do have Walker Little, who you would if you brought him back and not Cam, he could potentially be that starting left tackle, and he's going to be a little bit cheaper than Cam, okay? I get it, the looking ahead process, but Jacksonville right now, you're trying to win this season right now, and you need a starting corner. You're going to need a starting corner next year. I mean, and to Jamal's logic of you're looking ahead, you're going to lose Cam. I mean, Ronald Darby, 2-year deal. Tyson Campbell not guaranteed to come back next year. He's in the last year of his contract. So I do think you have to almost look ahead at multiple positions. And I think corner right now, receiver as well, are two positions where it's more of a need. I think you've got your starting offensive lineman already set. You've got a backup in Walker Little already on the team. Ezra Cleveland's your starting left guard. You got Mitch Morris and Luke Fortner competing at center. Brandon Sheriff at right guard. You can bring back Cooper Hodges from last year. So I do think there are some pieces in place in the offensive line. But that being said, if there is a tackle that falls, I mean, say there's a Joe Alt that falls or something like that. It happens every year.
It does.
You kick the tires. The same thing to me if Brock Bowers fell.
I'm already starting to sling him.
And he's sitting there. I think maybe you kick the tires on that and say, hey, same thing with a Jared Verse. But in this mock draft situation we're looking at, Jacksonville's going to have to get probably the third corner on the board right now, or you're going to have to get the third receiver or fourth receiver on the board in that situation. Where do you have those guys ranked and structured in your scouting process? So, in this one, I mean, Cooper from Iowa is a trendy pick in many drafts as a top 10 guy. In this one, he's fallen. I don't know. Do you invest in that?
In Cooper?
In Cooper, or in a receiver. Say Terrion Arnold falls, Quinion Mitchell kind of falls, those guys. So
Look, I think there's some needs here for sure. The way I look at it is you could post June 1 cut Cam, save a ton of money.
Yeah.
That it makes it a little bit easier to get that Trevor Lawrence extension done, maybe that Josh Allen extension done. Maybe you're a player for some other post June 1 cuts or some of those cuts during training camp now because you've saved that money. One of my F-it crew in Fuaga, Fashanu, and Fatanu will be on the board at 17. And if one of them's there, they're all really good. And the guy who at least is on the board right now while we're talking about it, Troy Fatanu from Washington, he could play guard.
Yeah.
He could play guard for a season. And then he played left tackle in college. He can play right tackle. You got a ton of flexibility on that offensive line now for the future, because you know what? You know how political candidates say a vote for me is a vote for the future? A vote for an offensive lineman is a vote for Trevor Lawrence's future.
Yeah,
he appreciates your vote. We may have a little bit of a friendly bet here. If you didn't read our write-up over on News4JAGs.com, I said that the pick should be Troy Fatanu. Jaguars should go O-line at 17. Justin called me crazy. So now I'm not going to let him forget it, and we may have a little bit of a little.
I did say I would give him a year-long subscription free of charge to the News4JAGs podcast and newsletter, and pay him $25 if they took offensive line. I just don't see offensive line right now. I could be wrong. That could change if Cam somehow moves on.
Sure.
Trent Baalke thought that where that Cam rumor came from, that Cam would not be back. That's not accurate. But hey, I mean, when you're restructuring and doing that stuff, and there's been some Cam buzz over the weekend where he's clearing out Jaguar stuff from his social media accounts. I don't know. I just don't think right now, the way this team is wired and built, I think they've got their starting line in place. And I do think you invest because you're thinner at corner, you're thinner at that nickel spot, and especially, God forbid, if a Calvin Ridley situation happens next year with Tyson Campbell, or Tyson falls off and has a little bit of a non-productive year, or not a bounce-back year. I mean, he struggled this past year with injuries and just ineffectiveness. So I think you're sitting a little bit worse on the corner slot next year than you're on that offensive line. You got Walker Little waiting in the wings.
Yep.
I don't know. I think Jags are more of a win now kind of situation.
They definitely are looking at it as far as win now. All right, so let's get back to this simulation, and maybe we'll have some time to run one or two more. Right. So in this version, where are we going to go with this pick? I'm not a fan. I'm a fan of Cooper DeJean, but I'm not a fan of him in Ryan Nielsen's defense as a man cover corner, a press man corner almost exclusively. I don't know if he'd survive there. That's not going to be playing him to his strengths. I don't know if he reaches his ceiling in that sort of defense. So that was why I said I wanted to preface that, because I said no to Cooper a minute ago. I think Brian Thomas is the guy here for me.
Yeah, I'm with you.
The wide receiver from LSU looks size, weight, speed. Trent Baalke loves that kind of thing. He likes to, you hear it at every level. The guy that gets off the bus first is supposed to be that big guy that intimidates the other team. And Brian Thomas is that kind of player. He's huge, can run like a horse out there, stallion. And the Jaguars need to start surrounding Trevor with these dynamic weapons. They've done a decent job, but you feel better if you add Brian Thomas.
Yeah, and I like Thomas. The thing with Cooper in Iowa, a lot of thoughts are he would end up at safety at the next level. So do you spend the number 17 pick in the draft on a guy who
safety or a slot corner? I mean,
not to me. I mean, a lot of thoughts are that he's going to flex to safety in the NFL eventually, and I just don't think that is the situation for Jacksonville to spend the draft pick on at that point in the draft, a guy who is going to be a slot guy this year and maybe just into the future as well. So I'm with you. I think they bypass the offensive tackles. I think they'll bypass Cooper DeJean from Iowa, interior defensive line help, Jerzon Newton from Illinois. And I think with you, I think they go Brian Thomas. Receiver, that gives you a build block for the future. He could be that, technically, that alpha that you've looked for quite some time in Jacksonville. So that's who I am comfortable taking, Jamal.
All right, we came to a consensus of rolling with a wide receiver, which is against the corner. Again, I think the Jaguars have positioned themselves. So let's go ahead and re-rack this thing and give it another go-round on another site so we can see if we can run one more simulation and see just where we land on this. But I think that's what we were kind of talking about or alluding to early in this, that the Jaguars have positioned themselves where when the draft shakes out, they're in a spot where they'll be able to have these discussions about who the best player is on the board and how they can help this team immediately and not feel like they have to go cornerback. Because keep in mind, like slot corners in the NFL are a devalued position. For whatever reason, teams aren't heavy on go and get those guys.
Yes.
I mean, they feel like they can find them somewhere. So even guys that are in this draft that people think are going to be very good slot corners, many of them are going to slide down boards and might be there in day 2, day 3. So the Jaguars, as far as getting a nickel goes, they'll probably be able to find one in the mid rounds of the draft. They don't have to go searching for that early. If they're searching for a corner early, it's because they think they need an outside guy in the future, and maybe he plays the nickel this year, but sometime in the next 2 years, that guy's on the outside being a corner going against these X and Z receivers in the league.
And that's what you're expecting. You're drafting a guy that high. I mean, a corner, you're not drafting him to be a slot corner for his career. You need a guy. I mean, slot corners, when I think of a slot nickel corner, I think of Trey Herndon kind of type.
Right.
Trey Herndon is not a first-round pick.
He was undrafted free agent.
So you're thinking that's more of the norm at that position. If Cooper's his ceiling in the NFL to me is going to be a slot corner or a safety, to me it's just the positional value right there. It's just not worth it. So, all right, Jamal, we're at our second mock draft.
All right, let's get to it.
And some names off the board.
All right, who's already going? What we got?
Caleb Williams, obviously. Drake May, Jake Daniels, similar situation to our last one.
Okay, good.
Malik Neighbors at 4, which is surprising to me, over Marvin Harrison Jr., who goes 5 to the Chargers.
There's been a lot of buzz about that this week. For whatever reason, this is down Marvin Harrison Jr. week, and I'm not sure why people are feeling like that, but you know what? If y'all have Marvin Harrison Jr., just slide him down everybody's board. I don't have a reason why. Just let him slide, and if he's there at 17, you know what? So be it. The Jaguars will do the service to everyone and draft Marvin Harrison Jr. If you got questions, just don't pick him. Let him sit there till 17. We're good with that, right?
That's fine.
We can definitely agree on that.
That's fine, yeah. Number 6, Joe Alt going to the Giants. Offensive tackle for the Titans, Alum Fashanu.
Yeah, Fashanu.
Going 7 to the Titans. Rome is going Rome Odunze to Washington. Excuse me, Washington receiver Rome Odunze going to the Falcons.
Okay.
It's a great club up there. Dallas Turner going to the Bears. J.J. McCarthy, Jets pick him at 10. So the Zach Wilson experience.
I do think that quarterback's going to go. I think J.J. McCarthy was one Jack's pick. That's one of the other reasons I think somebody's getting pushed down the board is that J.J. McCarthy hype is there. And it happens every year. Quarterback needing teams search for a quarterback. Whether you love JJ, you hate JJ. I think JJ's gone before 17.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Michael Penix Jr. might be gone before 17.
I've seen mock drafts where they have the Broncos taking Bo Nix at 12.
Right.
Because
who's the Broncos quarterback right now?
It's Jarrett Stidham. I think is the.
They don't. I mean. So Sean Payton got to have somebody to throw the ball.
Yeah. So number 11, Quinion Mitchell going to the Vikings. 12, our boy Brian Thomas going to the Broncos at 12.
Like I said, I think he's off the board for the Jags pick. We do.
The Raiders going Fuaga, offensive tackle. J.C. Latham, another offensive tackle from Bama. He's going to the Saints. Brock Bowers goes to the Colts. Disappointing. If Brock Bowers, that's my guy. If Brock Bowers is there, that's a playmaker waiting to happen. Again, I know you got Evan and you just had a second-round pick last year with Brenton Strange, but man, if Brock Bowers is there at 17, you got to pounce for Jacksonville. Seahawks, going your boy Fatanu. So 17.
So my epic crew's all gone.
Gone.
Okay, that's fine.
So on the board, available left, Terrion Arnold, corner from Bama. Latu. So you're your boy there. Jared Verse. Marius Mims, Johnny Newton, defensive tackle from Illinois, who was still available the last time. Jackson Powers Johnson, Oregon center available. Chop Robinson, great combine. The edge from Penn State, Nate Wiggins, he was available. Cooper John was available. Byron Murphy, the second was available. Kool-Aid McKinstry. These are guys we talked about. Keon Coleman as well. So this mock simulator a little bit different than what we saw last time. So some more options here for us, Jamal, to discuss.
I'll look through. Okay, so I think the big difference is Terrion Arnold was gone last time. He's on the board this go-around. Terrion Arnold is a very interesting guy. A lot of people have penciled him in. He is one of the top corners in this draft, had a big season just a year ago. I more prefer his teammate, Kool-Aid McKinstry, than Terrion Arnold. Just personally. As far as my comfort goes with taking a corner, Kool-Aid has consistently done it for years now at Alabama, has been a prototypical lockdown press man corner, as opposed to Terrion, who had a really big season last year and now is going to move on. But Terrion would be a much better slot corner than Kool-Aid would for this immediate season. So while I know Kool-Aid may not be the trendy pick at corner as much as Terrion Arnold is, I am more comfortable with his teammate Kool-Aid than I am with Terrion. And that's not a knock on Terrion. I just prefer Kool-Aid. I just, red Kool-Aid.
Did have a health issue pop up at the combine, but worrisome still.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay, so
it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. Now, if he slides down boards and I can get him later, I guess, sure. But
so there's other guys. Keon Coleman is available. I think
I can't go Keon this early, and I love Keon Coleman.
And I think in this draft, I mean, it's
Sure.
deep on corners and deep on receivers, and that's why people were banging Trent Baalke a little bit for that 3rd and 5th for Calvin Ridley, because a 3rd round pick in this draft, that's going to yield possibly a low end starter type of situation. So you give that to the Falcons for a Calvin Ridley deal. So a 1-year rental was tough in that regard, because again, 3rd round pick, Jaguars, you're getting a guy who could possibly factor into that starter range. So I like Terrion Arnold.
Okay.
I like Jared Verse, who's still available in this as well.
Look, let me go ahead and tell you, I love Jared Verse. I absolutely love Jared Verse as a player, his mentality on the field, mentality off the field. If the Jaguars pick him, I think it would be fantastic. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think they're going to go edge in the 1st round. I was on the board saying that, look, 1st round defensive line was there as a need until they added Eric Armstead, and now I'm kind of like, they'll add edge help later on in the draft. So I don't think Jared Verse is destined for Jacksonville, but I absolutely love this dude. I mean, the fact that you say a guy who's at Buffalo, COVID happens, he's losing a season, dad builds him a gym in the garage, and he just goes home and starts lifting weights, puts on 60 pounds of muscle. Next thing you know, he's at FSU bullying people. Look, I love Jared Verse. Perfect mentality. He is going to be a huge addition to somebody's football team. I'd be surprised if it's Jackson.
Yeah, you never know.
Hey, he could rock out the interviews and convince the Jags to go edge, but I'm going to tell you right now, at least he would fit better in Ryan Nielsen's defense. But I love Latu too. If they were going to go edge, I mean, that dude is smooth. He was a better athlete at the combine than I think people were expecting. I mean, if the Jaguars wanted to draft an edge, Latu would be a home run kind of pick. I mean, all the dude did was produce sacks in college. Like, how can you go wrong with that? So, look, the Jaguars need to pay Josh Allen. They already got Trayvon Walker. They just brought in Eric Armstead, who's more of an interior defensive lineman than really an edge. If they wanted to add another edge and then they ran in the pick for Latu, the first thing I'd probably say is that they don't love Josh Allen enough, and they're probably not going to pay him. That would be my initial reaction. And then once that sets in, I'd say, man, Latu is a baller, and they got a guy.
He's another guy, though, who's got medical question marks.
He does have medical question marks.
He medically retired.
And Baalke loves him a medical question mark.
True.
Come on now.
That's true. Then Walker Little. I mean, you guys with no ACLs.
He drafted what was the Lattimore kid from South Carolina? He drafted him while he was at while he was in San Francisco.
Blew his knee out.
One of the guys who his
terrible injury.
If you saw that injury, please don't look it up if you haven't seen
terrible
it.
Injury.
It was bad.
Terrible injury.
God. Marcus Lattimore?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. Marcus.
Or is it
Lattimore.
Marshawn? One of those
something
two.
like that. No, Marshawn Lattimore plays for the Saints.
Saints, that's right. Okay.
I think it was Marcus Lattimore.
I
think that was it.
Terrible injury, and do not go YouTube now.
No.
If you have not seen it. In this situation, I'm leaning towards either Arnold or Verse for me.
I'm with you for Arnold. I think corner in this situation would be the pressing need that they address. You got one of the top corners on the board. You can't really go wrong with this guy. You feel pretty comfortable about him playing in the slot this year and then moving outside next year.
So I like that. The Jared Verse, an edge kind of situation. I agree with you. I think you're gonna. That's kind of a kick on Josh Allen. This is your future kind of deal. We're talking about future and preparing ahead. That's your Josh Allen insurance for next year when he's too pricey.
That's exactly what it is.
You get him off that franchise tag. You let Josh play under the franchise tag 1 year. You put Verse under your wing if you're Josh Allen and tutor him, and that's how that situation looks. So to me, I think you go the second-rated corner in the draft, and Terrion Arnold. Yeah, Latu's got a neck injury that is going to be scrutinized, and we just saw
it's going to be under a microscope.
Leighton Vander Esch, retire. The Cowboys linebacker retire due to a neck injury. Neck injuries they're real crazy.
Yeah,
and
those are a problem.
And I remember the last guy that Jacksonville drafted entering the draft who had significant medical questions was Miles Jack, and Miles Jack was projected top 15 talent in that draft. He fell to the second round because he basically, before the draft, said he had an arthritic knee, essentially. He was going to need significant knee surgery in the future, and Miles Jack fell all the way to the second round despite being a top 15 talent. So Latu with the neck injury, and that neck injuries are just finicky. I mean, Michael Cheever is a good Jaguars example, who had a back injury, I think, in his rookie season or second season, and really never played again, had to retire from the league. So anytime you're talking neck or back, I think that's a little bit of a red flag, question mark to me.
That's definitely a red flag. Look, that's one of the questions that he's had to answer. It sounds like his medicals have come back fine, but that is something that could linger. It could pop up again. You never know. But Laiatu Latu has been a fantastic talent, but in this situation, I do think Terrion Arnold is the right decision. You want to run one more? Or do you think we're...
I think we're good, right? We got offense and defense in this draft. So which one do you like better? You happier with the Brian Thomas pick or Terrion Arnold?
You know, look, I think those are two of the trendy picks for the Jaguars right now. Overall, I think Brian Thomas and Terrion Arnold are both the guys that a lot of people are mocking to the Jaguars, because Thomas and Arnold are both fits for the Jaguars, ultimately.
True.
I don't think you can go wrong if the Jaguars drafted Brian Thomas Jr. at wide receiver or Terrion Arnold at cornerback. If I had to pick between the two, I think Brian Thomas Jr. is the better of the two for the Jaguars, just because I think he's going to be a better player in the NFL. I think he has elite talent. I mean, I'm telling you, the size, the height, the weight, and to be able to run that fast, he's going to be a problem in the NFL. Yeah. And to get a guy like that on the Jaguars offense, you say, I got Brian Thomas Jr., then you have Gabe Davis, and you got Christian Kirk in the slot. You feel pretty good. And then you say, all right, well, if they can keep Zay Jones here as the wide receiver 4, man, that's a problem.
Hear me out. In a 2-round mock, if you have a Keon Coleman kind of sighting in round 2, remember they kept their 2nd-round pick, having not re-signed Calvin Ridley. So
don't tempt me with a good time.
Keon?
Look. Don't tempt me with a good time now, Justin. That's right up my alley.
Keon round 2, I like it. DJ Chark round 2 had a good. DJ Chark was a 2nd-rounder from LSU.
Look, I like a lot of these receivers. I like Brian Thomas Jr. I think he's has a chance to be an elite receiver. I think Keon Coleman's going to be really good. I like Brennan Rice. I like Jerry Rice's son. I think he has a shot to be a good player in the NFL, and has the size that the Jaguars need. I like Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky, guy that played with Austin Reed, somebody from the Jacksonville area. So maybe we can get a co-sign from him later on in the offseason. But I think there are options in this draft where the Jaguars don't have to go receiver in round 1, which is one of the reasons why I've said, look, offensive line, it's tough. It's tough to get an elite offensive lineman outside the 1st round. Offensive line players are like edge players. Yeah. Like you go get them, and if you don't get them early, you ain't getting them. And that's where I've kind of landed on. Maybe one of my Effort crew. It just makes sense, Justin. All
right, we gotta wait. We gotta wager on it. But I'm with you. I like the Brian Thomas pick. I think you go receiver, corner, receiver at 17 and 48. So I think you can inverse those two there, unless a Joe Alt type kind of guy falls to Jacksonville at 17, or Brock Bowers falls to Jax at 17. But I'm good with corner, receiver, corner. 1st, 2nd.
If Joe Alt falls to 17 somehow, some way.
Or you go up and get one of the first 2 receivers in the draft, Marvin or Malik. I don't know.
Would you trade up?
I would consider trading up.
Consider trading up?
Yeah,
I'm not averse to it.
If you could get Marvin here, go up from 17 to, say, 4 or 5, it cost him a lot.
It's going to cost him
the 2nd round and maybe a 1st rounder next year, or a Zay Jones kind of situation. I think you go up and you get Marvin Harrison or Malik Neighbors. I think that'd be a great opportunity. That's sick. That suggests we're all in on this season.
We're going to get it done.
We're winning now. We're going to get it done. We got to do something to keep up with the Texans. They got a lot better in free agency. You see what C.J. Stroud is. He's what we thought Trevor would be early on. Hasn't quite got there yet. Oh, is that a shot?
You said the wrong words there, buddy. All right.
Again, Trevor to me, Kirk Cousins. He's got to.
Well, Kirk Cousins is one of the highest paid men in the league after the way he keeps bouncing around from team to team. He also seems to have no home because no team wants to keep him there. So
yeah, he's a guy that can win you the regular season, but not winning the playoffs. Trevor's got a playoff win. Trevor has a playoff win, and so does C.J. Stroud. And I think, what the Texans have done in the last 18 months has been phenomenal. Yeah, Danielle Hunter to go with Will Anderson. C.J. Stroud, what he's done. The Colts have gotten better in free agency. So the AFC South, which was left for dead a year and a half ago, has gotten a lot better in the last 18 months.
All right, before we wrap this thing up, we were getting ready to wrap it up, but now we're going to have to extend this thing for a second. Because now you done gone down the C.J. Stroud C.J. Stroud rabbit hole. Here's where I want to start, and I'm not going to go too deep into because C.J. Stroud is very talented. He's a good quarterback. Here's my question for you. Let me go ahead and take that off the screen because we're going to be here for a second. All right. So let's think back to Trevor's rookie year, and I'm just going to ask you either or, like which one you'd pick.
Okay.
The head coach, Ryans or Urban?
At the time, Urban was the unicorn, but I mean, D'Amico Ryans got the NFL experience, player, coach, assistant coach, coordinator, all that kind of stuff. So give me Ryans over Urban. Urban was more of the unknown and the potential kind of thing.
Okay. Now, Nico Collins, who last year was the first time as a 1,000-yard receiver. He was we'll consider him their number one receiver last year, right?
Yep.
Okay. So him or DJ Chark?
That's tough because DJ had promise, but he's kind of been a drifter since leaving Jacksonville. So I would probably say that's close to a wash. Maybe Nico, a slight edge.
So you'd say maybe a wash.
Yeah.
We'll call it a wash just for sake of conversation. All right. The next one is either Old Man Marvin Jones or Laviska Shenault. I'll let you pick between the two, or Tank Dell.
Good Lord. Tank Dell.
Tank Dell better than either one of them, right?
Laviska was a throwaway.
Okay.
A man without a position. Yeah. And Marvin was average.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
And I didn't. Okay, so now, we'll say Tank Dell goes against Laviska.
Yeah.
So I'll give you Marvin Jones because I think this is an easier comparison.
Okay.
Marvin Jones or Old Man Robert Woods.
Yeah.
Who was with the Texans.
Marvin Jones.
You're taking Marvin Jones over him. So right now we've got a wash, Texans lean, Jaguars lean.
Yep.
Let's go to tight end. Who was the tight end in 2020?
Oh man.
I don't even remember.
I don't remember. Was it Dan Arnold?
It was Dan Arnold. They traded for Dan Arnold. It was the great Dan Arnold. He was a leader in the locker room.
Yeah.
It was Dan Arnold who was their offensive threat. Dan Arnold or Dalton Schultz, Justin?
Yeah. Not even close.
Yeah.
Not even close.
All right. And then we can go through the offensive line, too. I mean, player by player. Yeah. Like here, and matter of fact, I'll give you one. Laramie Tunsil. Let me know when was the last time the Jaguars had a offensive lineman on the level of
I mean, you have to say Cam and Laramie, and that's obviously Laramie.
I'm just saying. So CJ came into a much better situation than Trevor.
He did.
It's stable with a former player who had a good system. There's more talent on that offense. The Jaguars in that season, there was hope for promise. You didn't know what Laviska was. You hoped that DJ could build off of the 1,000-yard season he had in, was that 19 he had the 1,000-yard season, 2020 was the bad season, so 21 was Trevor's rookie season. So you hope maybe DJ could get back to his 19 form, have another 1,000-yard season. They brought in Marvin Jones, who was on the back end of his career, but you thought he could stabilize things. They traded for Dan Arnold to try and get something going on the offense, and he'd shown flashes at times throughout his career. The Texans offense.
It was lean. Yeah, it was lean.
It was bad. And they missed on 2 first-round picks before him. I mean, Caleb Vaughn and C.J. Henderson, both Panthers at this point.
And Visca.
I mean, and Visca. Like, it was bad. All right, it was bad. It was bad. There was no way around it. It was just not good.
That's true. But I will say,
all right,
this past his rookie year, Trevor's third year, who was better?
Now that I can't argue.
So, I mean, there's CJ was far better than Trevor in year 3. Trevor's third year in the league. And, Trevor won a playoff game as a second-year guy and had a great sophomore season in the NFL. But CJ unquestionably was better than Trevor Lawrence. And I don't think there's any way to dice that, deflate it, splice it any which way.
CJ was better.
CJ was better. He was a better player than Trevor was. And I do think that was coaching. I think that was the injuries were not as substantial to those key players. You had a great offensive lineman in Laramie. So I do think that CJ had things in Houston last year that Trevor did not have last year in Jacksonville. Stability and they kind of got that hot hand like Jacksonville did in year 2 with Doug and Trevor in Trevor's year 2, and you got hot at the right time, and that scares me more than Indianapolis or more than Tennessee. Just what Houston is building. They got draft picks, cap space, and added the right pieces in free agency. So that's a team I'm more worried about than the Colts or the Titans.
We'll do a State of the AFC South episode here down the road as the offseason kind of moves along. because there's definitely some things to look at because the AFC South should be competitive next year. But I think a good draft class for the Jaguars, and they should be right into the thick of it. All right, we'll wrap up this episode of News4JAGs podcast. Hey, make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast at. And if you're watching it online, you can always check them out over on News4JAGs.com, YouTube, or anywhere else where you want to find your podcast. Generally, you look for it, we're there. You can also follow us on Twitter and interact with us there. I heckle Justin all the time, so feel free to get in on it. But thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.